So, my name is Walter Aigner. I will tell you a little bit more about me soon after. I'm doing a documentary about European wool and what I have learned so far. I want to state one thing very clear. I do not speak for European wool. I do not speak for the wool growers in Europe. I do not speak for the wool industry. All I can try is to give you my opinion. And this opinion is evolving. I started more than 2.5 years ago with European wool, with the documentary, and I plan to film until the next summer. So what is it when we think about sheep, shepherding? What do we see in front of our eyes? We see romantic pictures. We see a shepherd. This one here is in Romania on the Trans-Humans. You see the donkeys carrying his things. We see the Valais black nose sheep, and we see the beautiful white wool. But there is a dark side to wool, and especially to wool in Europe. We are burning wool. We are destroying it, and this happens a lot. We see, when I travel through the countries, I see wool rotting everywhere. And all of it that is in this initial clip is illegal. You are not allowed to burn wool out in the open. You are not allowed to dump wool out in the open. And why is that? Wool is considered an animal byproduct. Okay, now it's here. So to me, sheep grow wool, and wool is a marvel. It's a fantastic fiber, and I want to tell you, I'm not a wool expert, I'm not a sheep expert. I know a little bit of everything. And we have tried to copy the properties of wool. We have failed so far. All the synthetic fiber produced cannot do what wool can do. It's just much cheaper, and it has a huge lobby behind it. So what was the motivation for the documentary? I've been a carpet maker for almost 25 years of my life. My father founded the company with Swiss money in Austria back in 1963. I was born in 65. So I really can say I grew up with wool. I joined his company because he asked me to. Admittedly, not because of my passion for it. I grew passionate because I tried to do everything I do with passion into it. And I left the company 5 years ago because somebody didn't believe in my passion for it, in my conviction that you actually can turn our product into a luxury product, which for me was the basis of the future. If you want to do something with handcrafts in Europe on an industrial level, you need to do it in a price segment that allows to pay the bills. And then I left this company 5 years ago. It was a tremendous journey. Just to tell you a little thing about it, when I took over the company, it was called Tisca in Austria. We had 4 manufacturing plants, 1 in Tunisia, 2 in Austria, 1 in Switzerland. And I melted that all down to 1 in Romania, Transylvania, that I built up from scratch. That means I had to fire many people. Didn't get sued once in the process, which I'm still proud of today. So we tried to do it without money because we didn't have any at the time. The market was completely changing. And then we rebuilt the production in Transylvania, starting in '99 at a time where no investors were going to Romania, and finishing this quest in 2012. And from then on, I finally had the money again to invest in marketing PR, and it was very successful in the few years that were left at my work there. When I left, I had the offer from an investor to rebuild this plant. He told me, Walter, name the price, how much money do you need to do it? And I decided, no, that's it for me. I don't want to go into competition with my former partners, with my former team. And I'll do something completely else. Went into a fresh start. I'm actually working on a social housing issue. So far away from wool, it couldn't be any farther. And I will continue with this issue of social housing because that touches me as well when I'm done with wool, which might take a while. So why did I get back? I got a call from an Austrian actor who's very well known in the German-speaking countries. And he told me, Walter, I just came back from a walk in the north of Germany, met a shepherd, asked him, knowing about you, your history, what do you do with the wool? And the shepherd's answer was, throw it away, what else? Like this is the most normal thing to do. And he said, Walter, you got to do something about it. I told him, not me, I'm the wrong guy. I will not get operative again with wool. But we spoke for a long time then. And at the end, we decided, okay, I'll do the research and he'll ask his production company to do a documentary about European wool. I did the research for 8 weeks. It was really my start into it. And I found out what I already suspected. It is a European problem. When I talk to somebody in Romania, they of course believe Romania is bad. So everything is shit in Romania. And they don't use their wool. But when I talk to somebody in Germany, I hear the same thing. When I talk to a shepherd in Sweden, he says, go into my shed, there's the wool from the last 5 years rotting in there. Nobody wants it. When I talk to somebody in Bulgaria, even in Spain, and Spain really is an amazing country, the origin of the merino sheep, and Spain is, after the United Kingdom left the European Union, the largest wool-growing country in Europe, having 15 million sheep. And the sheep numbers I give you are always counted in December, because usually lambing season still happens in spring. So it's really the male and female grown sheep that are counted. And they have 6 million merino sheep out of the 15 million, and they are not even able to sell the merino wool in Spain at the moment. So even millions of kilos of merino wool in Spain are rotting away because there is absolutely no market for it anymore. I did my research. I sent this all to my acquaintance and didn't hear from him anymore for the last 2 years. So, but in this research period, I as well looked at many documentaries. And my best friend is in filmmaking in Austria. I asked him how documentaries are being produced. I didn't like what I hear because it didn't reflect my passion for a subject that I get into. A usual television documentary covers perhaps 5, 6 locations, interview partners, and goes to 1, maximum 2, maximum 3 countries. And it's mostly funded nationally. And what do you do then when you have a European problem? Like to tell stories, you do it your own. I always liked taking pictures. Thanks for mentioning my pictures on Instagram. So I had to learn to film. I had to learn to script write. I had to learn to do the makeup, which Charlotte had to suffer through. I had to learn to set up the light, to record the sound. 2 years ago, for instance, I forgot to turn on the sound recorder when I was visiting Gotland and had the pleasure to an interview there. So there's a lot to learn when you go into filmmaking. But my motivation is really, I want to help the discussion about European wool. And I usually stay in hotels when I travel, and I tell people why I'm in this region. I come to very remote regions of Europe. And nobody knows as a consumer what's happening to European wool. So please consider, that's the basis for what I believe. Merino wool, I hear that sometimes. The Australians, the New Zealand people from New Zealand, they have different conditions and they take our market away. Merino wool is not the enemy. Synthetics are. Synthetics are, and our way to use it, and our thrive to get it as cheap as possible. And the second thing is, that's something that shepherds often say. but our wool is bad. There is no such thing as a bad wool. You can find a purpose for every wool that is around. In the south of Spain, there's a sheep breed bred for meat. Their wool is about 15 millimeters long, and they have about half a kilo to a kilogram of wool a year. Everybody would consider this a bad wool, but it felts beautifully, and you can make wonderful felted product out of it. Our ancestors did it. They did not have our technical abilities. They did not have the money that is around. The only thing they had is time. And we consider time as so essential and spend it on so much bullshit. So whenever I talk to people, and that's true for all of Europe, about wool, I always hear the same things popping up. And this even comes from researchers. And that's what I call the simple solutions. We know wool is a perfect insulating material. So wool insulation is the perfect purpose for wool, isn't it? Yes, but there is not one single moss repellent approved in the European Union that will stick to wool permanently and that I know of. And I'm always ready to change my mind and to even excuse to people that make wool insulation today, but I want to see proof. And having a 6 months test that something is moss-proof isn't enough for me, because the wool insulation should stick in the house, in the room where it's in, for 25 years. So what do most people do? They do something that to me is horrible. They put something in the wool, some chemicals that make wool fireproof. And as a little side effect, it kills everything alive that gets on the wool. I wouldn't want to live with this chemical in my living quarters. I wouldn't want my kids to live with that. And then they call this it's not fireproofing, they write on it. It's not moss-proof, they write on it. They say it's wool protect and write that on. I consider that lying to the consumer. And I don't want the wool industry to do that. So we need research in finding a moss repellent that sticks perfectly to the wool. And now you will perhaps smile a bit because that has been around in the market. We had 2 moss repellents on a chemical basis, copying a natural product. But the companies offering it to the market withdrew it because the market was too little. And I don't think these agents would get approval today, because it's much harder to approve a new chemical substance than to actually turn an existing one into it at the time. The second thing that I hear again and again is use wool pellets as fertilizers. Again, that's a brilliant idea. Wool is natural, wool is carbon, but treating wool into a pellet takes energy, takes time. It's mostly small operations. The end product is expensive, and it's mainly a nitrogen fertilizer, which contains, to my knowledge, 10 to 12% of nitrogen, which is rather low. So the big farms that use a lot of fertilizers will not use it. You will find some convinced ecological farmers that might use it, and the most use goes into household gardening, which is fine, which is perfect, and it works, but it will not solve the wool issue in Europe. We have more than 60 million sheep within the European Union, always counting in December. And when we say it's 2.5 kilograms of wool per sheep on an average, we have 150 million kilograms of wool in the European Union a year. And we cannot turn it into pellets. The next one comes from an Italian professor who has dedicated his life to wool, especially coarse wool. He said, burn it for energy production, which is, again, is a nice idea because the burning wool value of wool, the calories in wool, is the same as in wood, between 4,000 and 5,000 per kilogram. But collecting wool, pressing it, transporting it from the small wool growers to a central incineration station is so much more expensive than all the other products that can burn in there. Why should anybody do that? We would need subventions to burn it. So to me, that's not a solution, and I hate the thought of burning wool, to be honest. And the last thing is improve wool quality by breeding, which again is a nice idea. And of course, when we look at the wool breeds that we have today, they are the results of hundreds of years of crossbreeding, trying to improve them on meat, on milk, on wool. We shouldn't stop doing that, what we anyway do, but it's not the solution for European wool, because the finest European wool, Spanish Merino, is not finding a market at the moment. So why should any sheep owner, any shepherd, undergo the risk of changing the breed that he has and that he loves, otherwise hopefully he wouldn't work with it, to breed and crossbreed again, to get a better wool that has no market at all? So after almost 2 years in, I sat down and I said, okay, what's the problem that I see? What's it that I believe? And I see that we lack know-how. And we lack know-how on all the stages of wool production. Meaning the sheep farmer doesn't know sheep should be dry when you shear the wool. The shearing places look horrible. You have polypropylene strings around the hay balls, and they try, it's just in the straw where the sheep are overnight. And once you have the polypropylene in, it's very difficult to get it out. So we need a good sheep handling before the shearing. We should need a good sheep handling during the shearing. We need somebody taking away the dirt. And we need some wool handling on the place. And all these things in the majority of Europe don't happen because wool has no value. Research. So many wool institutes in Europe closed down. So I'm happy to see that there is some textile research happening in Sweden, in Borås. They have found a different purpose. When I spoke to the German Deutsche Wollinstitut in Aachen, which was a huge research institution on wool, they told me, yes, we still have a project on wool. It was a DNA analysis of cashmere to determine where it actually comes from. That's what the former German Wool Institute told me is their research on wool. We don't appreciate wool. Of course, it's expensive. Why should we appreciate anything that's hard to work with, that's expensive? Why should we appreciate the work of a shepherd? Why should we appreciate these little animals running around that look cute out in the green meadows? But actually, we hear from vegans, from peoples, they emit as a ruminant animal methane gas, which is very bad for the climate. Why should we appreciate that? I'll come to it later. And the wool value chain is broken. The next picture will show you that this is true and it is not true. Because what's the wool value chain? When we look back in history, each country had its own wool value chain. We are in Borås. Borås was the center. From here southwards, you had the center of the Swedish wool industry. And it more or less all collapsed. There are only a few companies that survived that. Bloodbath in the 70s. From my point of view, it was the Swedish government who wanted to kick the textile industry out of Sweden. That's the perspective I have from Austria. And why did they do that? Because they said, well, we are Sweden, we are a highly developed country, we should go into higher end products, and the textile industry is actually something that can help developing countries building up. So it's our responsibility as good social democrats to do the right thing. So we make it very hard for a textile company to actually work in Sweden. They were very successful on that. But the wool value chain is not entirely broken when we look at all over Europe. So what do you see here? You see, let's say, the larger wool scouring places that I know of, and I'm sure there are more. I'm sure there are things in the east of Europe that I don't know about, and I'm sure there are many small wool scouring places. I know of one illegal wool scouring that scours 10 tons of wool a year in France. I know of another one in France that does batch wool scouring, and there's one person actually doing it. That's legal, but they scour about 30 to 40 tons of wool a year without a big installation. They just do it. In green, you see what I consider rather small operations, like the only one left in France, which claims to scour 600 tons. I don't believe it. I think they scour perhaps something like 200 tons, like the tiny one in Austria that only runs when the father will be out of the hospital again, because he's the only one who knows how to run this wool scouring mill. The son doesn't. He's desperate. We, of course, have Gotland. The Iceland one should actually be green as well, but I don't know. I don't want to take credit away for them. And we have the yellow dots, which are the ones that I know of that scour mainly merino wool and mainly imported merino wool. I don't know the two ones in Poland yet. I want to visit them next year. I visited the one in Bulgaria, the red dot. The yellow dot is, I have to look up the name, Lempriere. Colhida scours European wool. Why do I show you that? Because wherever I travel to, there are plans to install a new wool scouring plant. Germany has a plan. France has the plan. In Romania, a project was assigned for a 16,000-ton wool scouring plant with 3 scouring lines, 32 million investment. I knew they were just bullshitting when they said they're gonna go with their wool into wool insulation, into pellets, and the leftover things they're gonna burn for energy production. Then I knew they were bullshitting. But the press loved the story and they took it in and told it like this is actually happened. I don't believe it will. And I follow the discussion in Germany closely. They think about setting up a wool scouring plant in Thüringen. Well, what do you need when you set up a wool scouring plant? First of all, you need perfect water. The best water in Germany is in Germany only for a few kilometers, because it's a river starting in Belgium, going over German territory and going back to Belgium. That's the water with 0-degree German hardness, which is like rainwater, free of any minerals, and sourcing the only wool scouring plant in Verviers, Belgium, that is left, one of, I think, 16 or 17 that were there 100 years ago, and that used this water for wool scouring. And Tratex in Belgium is struggling to find enough clients. So when we say we don't have enough wool scourings in Europe, it's a very regional or national point of view, because a truckload to Bulgaria, to Belgium, will not cost a fortune. And in Bulgaria, they run at 10% of the capacity. They could actually scour 16,000 tons a year. Can you imagine how sad it is when they run at 10% of the capacity? They have been supplying carpet yarns earlier on mainly to the Middle East. But traveling through Europe, you find many positive examples what's happening with wool. The biggest of which, I'll leave it to Peter to talk more about Lavalan, is Bauer Fliesstoffe with adjoining companies. I will mention Swiss Wool because they have a very unique way of wool collection. They actually use a hay baller to roll it up and get balls that are sealed, airtight, and use that to transport it to the wool scouring. And they collect more than 300 tons of Swiss wool. We have Laine Paysanne in France, which is very interesting. They make close home textiles, and they actually come from a group of shepherds that got together. The wife of one of the shepherds, Olivia, she was passionate about it and did want to stop the destruction of wool. And today they collect about 10 tons of wool and increase the price the shepherds get for the wool on an annual basis, depending on how the business goes. We have CC Wool with the clip-on wool blankets. And by the way, I believe clip-on is selling way too cheap. They should trust themselves to tell a much better marketing story. They should trust their consumer to value what they make and do with Swedish wool. So now I have said that. We have Rosa Pomar in Portugal, which has been a knitwear, knit yarn manufacturer in Lisbon for the last 20 years. And now she of course started with Portuguese merino. They have beautiful white and black merino wool in Portugal. And now she uses, I think, 6 additional breeds and created a hashtag that I love. Softness is overrated. Because whoever had fine merino wool sweaters, as I have had so many, you stick somewhere and you have a hole in it. This will not happen to a coarser wool, and wearing a shirt underneath will not make you feel if it is a little bit coarser. We have Chandam, which is an interesting story, a young woman coming out of agriculture in the south of France, herself collecting merino d'Arles wool, which is the finest French wool with about 20.8 micron. And she helps Segar Mazurel, which is wool merchants from the north of France that deal in merino wool worldwide, to start up the collection of about 100 tons of merino d'Arles wool in France. So teaching the shepherds in a several-year process how to handle the sheep leading up to the shearing, how to have a clean shearing place under their conditions. So she actually goes there and teaching people to sort the wool and pack it right. Wool Dreamers, Mantexman. Mantexman is one of the 3 remaining Spanish wool scouring plants, was supplying mainly the carpet trade, which collapsed over the last decades. So they started the Wool Dreamers project, beautiful in storytelling. Whoever is on Instagram, follow them. You can learn so much how you reach the consumer. We have Gottstein in Austria. They make felt. And they started to use, they make slippers as well, and they started to use wool from rare mountain breeds and German, Austrian, Swiss breeds and sell that very successfully, actually telling the story. That's the wool and that's the slipper you can buy from it. We have Woola in Estonia, who now gets a lot of media attention. They do packaging material out of wool so that we can stop using the plastic bubble foil that we use to package electronics, bottles, perfumes, or whatever. They just won a wonderful prize by the LVMH group in Paris. We have Pushka in Ukraine, which I'll have the pleasure to visit in May. They do home textiles and wool products in the Carpathian Mountains of the Ukraine, so far off the front. But still, it is very difficult for them to work, and I really look forward to see how they can cope with the situation. We have an Italian, very traditional wool company, of course, as well. They spin and weave Lanificio Paoletti in the north of Italy. And in 2008, when the crisis really hit, suddenly the supplies of merino wool stopped. It was difficult to finance anything in 2008. So what did they do? They thought about their old strengths and started using wool from the alpago sheep, which is an almost extinct breed in Belluno. And just to give you an idea, Belluno is when you come from Venice upwards towards Cortina Tampezzo. So it really is south side ridge of the Alps, leading up to the Dolomites that are so beautiful. They had 10 sheep breeds that were only there. Out of these 10, 6 are already extinct. And the alpago sheep is one of the 4 remaining, and they turned it into beautiful blankets. I had to buy it because I keep buying and giving away wool blankets when I travel. You just cannot stop. And we have a huge advocate of European wool. I don't know if you know Claudia Youngstra, an artist doing huge handmade felt wall hangings that are from the Museum of Modern Art, I guess, in New York, through big European insurance and banking companies. And she has her own sheep, almost a very traditional old Dutch breed, and she promotes wool without any end. And there are many, many more. You find them, but we don't know about them. And it's something that I often see. People that start up in wool are good in doing it, not so good in selling it. So when we look at these things, what do I consider important? The first thing is tell a strong local story. People like to connect with the region they live in. Make them understand what wool do for this region and that you actually work in this region with this region. It's easier when you control parts of the value chain. Jeanne Dame, for instance, she really goes out to the shepherd, collects the wool, sorts it, and she knows what she puts in the bag because she touched every kilogram of it. Be authentic and collaborate. I don't believe you will be successful in the long run if you have parts of the value chain that don't earn money. That's the sure way to break it in the future. And don't give up. So, to conclude my talk, when we look at that, this is in Denmark. It's the shepherd Berit with her dog and Spelschau sheep. When we look at that, most people would believe this is nature. It is not. Heather landscapes are the result of hundreds of years of sheep grazing. When we look out in the landscapes and live in the countryside of no matter what country in Europe, we usually don't see nature. It's very rare to see untouched nature. You have to go high up into the mountains on very steep hills where no machine can go, or in perhaps some remote areas of Sweden. And everything else is influenced by animals, by their shepherds, their guardians, by us trying to live off this land. Even up in the north in Lapland, you have the reindeer flocks moving through, one of the most sustainable pastoralisms that are in the world. And a shepherd, a walking shepherd, I know you don't have that a lot in Sweden, you have it in other parts of Europe, but that is probably the most sustainable way to grow a fiber. We now know from scientific research in New Zealand and from the Shanico Wool Company in North America that the wool they grow is carbon negative, including the methane gas emissions, which is a cycle and not adding to the global warming, as some haters of animals want us to believe. So please look out into the countryside and see not nature, but the result of a beautiful cultural landscape. I'll just let you watch that. Because may I present, that's Alina. Alina is the daughter of a Transhumant shepherd in Transylvania. And she's 8 years old, loves school, and by now she's old enough to get up with her parents at 3 o'clock in the morning and help them milk the sheep. Just that you know, and yeah, that's up on 1,300 meters in Romania. So when you buy wool from sustainable European sheep breeders, you not only get a great fiber, you get increased biodiversity. And please mention all the points that are listed on here are things that we spend money on in the form of subsidies. Millions and millions go into this. So sheep grazing increases biodiversity. A study from the Open University in Madrid from '92 shows that a flock of 1,000 sheep spreads 5 million seeds per day when they are transhumant and guarded by a shepherd. We keep the landscapes open. And many people say, well, why? We need forest. Forest is so good for the climate. Yes and no. The climate is not the only issue. We need to look at biodiversity, and the biodiversity in scrubland and young forests will be reduced greatly. What is great about forest is old forest. So let's first start to protect the old forests that are on this globe. And the moment a forest blows up in a fire, all the positive effects of storing carbon are fire, smoke, gone. Whereas when you have grazing animals, you store the CO2 as well in the ground every year. And the first farmers get paid for this job, to store carbon in the ground. We, of course, reduce the wildfire risk. So we base subventions now in Spain, Portugal, Mallorca, for shepherds to go out in the forest again and reduce the burnable material. We had huge fires in Portugal in 2017, the result of a paper industry growing eucalyptus trees in Portugal. And actually their turnover annually is 400 million euros. It's ridiculous that for that 127 people died, actually, in horrendous wildfires in Portugal. We have to increase CO2 storage. We need sheep to protect the Dutch and the North German dams against the floods. We reduce the risk of erosion and avalanches in my beloved mountains. And we see that the countryside is being alive. There's a beautiful cattle farmer and farmer in the United States, Will Harris. Look at his work. He shows that how you can bring jobs back to a rural community by actually doing more in place. And all this you get using European wool. So to me, today, what's the possible solution? Let's start out by saying, and I wanted to say that, it's the second thing. The wool industry did a horrible job over the last 70 years. I was part of this industry. I tried myself, I didn't know at the time. I made a range with Swiss wools, didn't even know the breeds behind it, didn't tell the story, gave it to the biggest furniture chain in Switzerland, beautiful carpets, didn't market it right. And before I could do it better, I left the company. We as an industry have been telling for 70 years how beautiful the wool fiber is. The result is the lowest wool price ever. Only 1% of the worldwide fiber usage comes from wool. The fiber that has built our countries, financed wars, okay, we don't need that, but it built Spanish wells, it built British wells. In the upper house in London, the lords still sit on the wool sacks showing the importance of wool to the British Empire. So the big problem is that the European wool has too low a market value. So I believe it would be a way to increase this value by telling the story why we need sheep and why we need shepherds. We don't have enough. I'll go to Norway tomorrow to learn more about the Norwegian system, and I look forward to it. But the Norwegian meadows could hold 4 million sheep. They only have 2. They could double the number of the sheep in Norway, double the number of the shepherds, do good for the environment, do good for the climate, if only we would buy more wool at a fair price. And we should finally start to unite. We don't face a Swedish problem, we don't face a German problem, we face a European problem. But we need in our representation democracy and equal rights to all. This will be a struggle, but we don't need some prophet going on the stage in Brussels and saying, I'm Europe, I'm wool, give me donations, give me subventions, and I'll solve all problems. I don't believe in that. I believe in working together.